Welcome to 7 Revolting Facts about Pedro Lopez. Pedro Alonso Lopez, born the 8th of October 1948, also known as the Monster of the Andes, is a Colombian serial killer, child rapist, and fugitive who murdered a minimum of 110 victims, mostly young women and girls, from 1969 to 1980, and claimed to have murdered over 300 victims across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. If you found this video interesting, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for weekly serial killer videos. Fact 1. His mother was physically abusive. Almost every serial killer suffered some sort of trauma that drove them to their madness, and Pedro Lopez most certainly fits this bill. Pedro's father, Medardo Reyes, was killed in La Violencia, a Colombian civil war between conservatives and liberals, while his mother Benilda was 3 months pregnant with him. Pedro had 6 older siblings from birth, and an additional 6 would follow. It isn't clear who every last child's father was, however, as Pedro claimed his mother was an actively working prostitute as she raised her dozen-plus children, an issue that easily could have warped his views on women from a young age. In addition to her questionable career choice as a mother of 13, Pedro also claimed Benilda beat him and his many siblings, usually after clients would beat and degrade her, thus possibly as a form of revenge. The vicious cycle would continue through Pedro's later actions. Fact 2. He was repeatedly assaulted by various strangers before he became the preeminent monster of the Andes. He found himself alone on the streets before he was even a teenager, with no one to turn to for help. Some might even wish they could have helped the boy, which is exactly what a seemingly kind stranger claimed he was doing when approaching Lopez on the street one day. Promising room, board, and care, the man then lured Pedro into an abandoned building and sexually assaulted him repeatedly. Shortly thereafter, an elderly couple found him and actually took pity on him, or so they thought, by sending him to a school for orphans. Unfortunately, that school for orphans hired a teacher who continued the pattern in Pedro's life by sexually molesting him after class, causing the boy to run away once more. Fact 3. He killed at least 3 men in prison, given his upbringing and life as described thus far, without any psychiatric help. It was only a matter of time before Pedro Lopez's took a turn for the worse and snapped, so to speak. His first run-in with the law wasn't nearly as serious as the later incidents would become, as Lopez was collared for car theft at 18 or 21 years old. Reports vary. More important than his age or the details of the crime is the fact that for the 3rd time in his life, Lopez was sexually assaulted by his fellow inmates. This time, however, he was old enough to fight back, murdering all 3 of them with a shiv he had crafted in prison. It's unclear whether or not this affected that particular jail stint, as the murders could have been ruled self-defense, but the end result was Lopez knowing he could kill and finding satisfaction in doing so. Fact 4. He assaulted and murdered over 300 girls. Whenever one person takes the life of another for no reason that anyone can understand, it's a tragedy. For this reason, it's hard to say who is worse between a murderer who took one life viciously and without remorse versus a serial killer who took a dozen or so in the same manner. Both examples are evil. It was just a matter of who was stopped first. Eventually, however, the numbers get so high we can definitely state one mass murderer was viler than the others, and with an alleged 350-plus victims, Pedro Lopez more than achieved that terrible status. Across 3 countries, his native Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, Lopez abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered literally hundreds of innocent young girls. In Ecuador alone, he pleaded guilty to 110 murders, half of which police were able to connect with bodies. Fact 5. He had sick, twisted parties with his victims' corpses. For most serial killers, luring a victim to their death has a pretty obvious ending. They kill the victim and move on to the next one. Pedro Lopez had different ideas with what to do with his corpses, however, often burying them en masse in the same shallow graves so he could go back and play with them later. While it may be easy to assume Lopez was doing so in a sexual manner as a necrophiliac, the real story may be even more disturbing. Essentially, Lopez would have tea parties with his victims, propping up decaying corpses alongside his newest kills and having imaginary conversations with them. What exactly Lopez talked about or what he pictured his victims saying to him is something we hope the world will never have to find out. Fact 6. He's one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Look deep enough in their vaults, and one can discover that Guinness has listed a world record for just about everything. At some point in history, the record-keeping organization decided to do away with some of the more violent and terrifying designations on their list, though worried some people might try and beat them by being even greater villains. This is why Pedro Lopez no longer sits in their pages as the most prolific serial killer, yet he may well hold that title. Claiming over 300 victims across 3 countries, and all in a span of less than a decade, Lopez was killing as many as 3 girls per week, in greater numbers than any other menace to society ever has. This truly makes him one of the worst criminals in history, and someone who deserved to stay behind bars for life, bringing up serious questions about how Ecuador handled his incarceration. Fact 7. His whereabouts have been unknown since 1998. The terror caused by the monster of the Andes momentarily ceased in 1980 when he was captured and sent to prison. Yet it came back in full force 14 years later upon his 1994 release for a little while, anyway, as Ecuadorian authorities were instantly ready to deport him back to his native Colombia, where Lopez was instantly put on trial for another of his many murders. Unfortunately, once again, the system failed spectacularly by sentencing Lopez to a mental institution for a mere 4 years. Hardly a fitting punishment for someone who took lives in the triple digits for pleasure. Arguably the scariest part of all is that since his release from the psychiatric hospital in 1998, the governments of Peru, Ecuador, and wherever else he might be traveling pretty much stopped keeping track of things. For all we know, Lopez is dead, but he could also still be at large. No upsurge in bodies has been seen in any of his old haunting grounds. Yet the world is a big place, and until a death notice is official, we can never be certain the monster of the Andes won't strike again. If you found this video interesting and learned something, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel.